Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another true crime deep dive. This is part 2 of the Ellen Greenberg case, and if you haven't seen part 1 yet, you're going to need to do that in order to understand what we're talking about today, because 1 always comes before 2, so I've linked it in the description box. Check that out, and then come back and join us here for part 2. We have a lot to go over here. I basically just took a quick break, took my sweater off, and took my braids out and put my hair up in a bun so I could tell the difference between the files, because I just recorded part 1. So I'm going to jump right in, okay? I'm going to jump right in because we got a lot to talk about. Before we dive in, though, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Magellan TV. If you're like me and you love documentaries the way that I do, you've probably already exhausted most of your documentary options on streaming platforms. Maybe you've even watched some of them twice. That is why you should try Magellan TV, a documentary streaming service founded by filmmakers. Magellan TV has more true crime documentaries than any other platform, and every week they add 15 to 20 hours of new content, so you'll never run out of something to watch. Yesterday, I was jumping in the shower to get ready to record a new episode of Crime Weekly, so I popped on a documentary called Sleepwalkers Who Kill, which I have to admit, for some reason I thought was a science documentary, like about the science of sleepwalking, but it actually ended up being a true crime documentary, and this film totally captured my attention, and it made me stay in the shower for way too long, and then everyone got mad at me because they had to wait for more hot water. Sleepwalking, although common, can sometimes be dangerous, turning innocent, good-intentioned people into what appear to be cold-blooded killers. Will the judge and jury believe that these suspects were truly asleep? Great question, right? And you can find out the answer for yourself when you try Magellan TV, which is completely ad-free and can be watched anytime, anywhere on your television, cell phone, tablet, or laptop. It's also compatible with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Google Play, and iOS. And they don't just have true crime content. They have amazing history, science, nature, and travel documentaries that will keep you entertained and educated 4 hours. With an annual membership of just $59.98 a year, you'll only pay $4.99 a month for 3,500 hours worth of amazing documentaries. And if you click the link in my description box, you can try Magellan TV out for yourself for 1 month free. No strings attached, no contracts to sign. You can cancel anytime you want, no questions asked, but I don't think you're going to want to because it's truly, truly amazing. Thank you so much to Magellan TV for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. Okay, so when we last left off, the parents of 27-year-old Ellen Ray Greenberg had decided that if they were going to get any justice for their only child, they were going to have to fight like hell for it. So they built a case showing that Ellen could not have possibly taken her own life in an effort to get her cause of death changed, because while it was listed as suicide, no investigation could take place. And after consulting with multiple experts, the Greenbergs and their allies had uncovered a plethora of new information and evidence to support their claims. But before we talk about that new information, I want to talk about some internet searches on Ellen's computer that the Attorney General's office claimed that they found years after the initial police and authorities had claimed there was no relevant information in Ellen's apartment or on her computer that showed she had taken her own life. Here is the statement from the Attorney General's office, quote, "Following the initial 2011 investigation carried out by the Philadelphia Police Department, our office received this case in 2018 on a conflict referral from the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. We conducted our own thorough investigation to determine a manner of death, interviewing the chief medical examiner of Philadelphia and the medical examiner who performed the autopsy, meeting with the family's representatives, and reviewing information they provided to our attorneys, among other steps. Among the additional evidence we reviewed were web searches for methods of committing suicide, quick death, and depression, which were done on Miss Greenberg's personal computer in the weeks before her death, and text messages between Miss Greenberg and a family member, her mother, shortly before her death, showing the decedent in serious mental distress. Our office has concluded that this evidence supports suicide as the manner of death. Accordingly, we have communicated our findings to the family through its representatives and have closed this investigation." End quote. First of all, I would like to say Once again, nothing I've seen or read to you in text from Ellen to her mother suggested she was ready to end it all. In fact, it seemed that she was, getting therapy and she was on medication because she did not like the way she was feeling and she wanted to feel better, which is normal. Not everyone who is in serious mental distress decides to stab themselves 20 times. In fact, very few people do. A lot of us are in serious mental distress every day, and I find it offensive that the DA's office is painting a picture that people who are going through a rough time are just steps away from taking their own lives. Many people struggle with this stuff all the time, and they fight to get better, which is what Ellen was clearly doing. And in a text to her mother, she seemed relieved to report that the Klonopin was working and it was helping her. But let's talk about the internet searches that apparently led the officials to concretely believe that Ellen had done this to herself. On December 18th, 2010, there was a Safari search for suffocation. That same day, there was a search for suffocation that ended up at Wikipedia. On January 3rd, someone using Ellen's computer had viewed a CNN story about a sex fantasy death. Now, I looked this up, and this is just simply a news story about a woman from Oklahoma named Rebecca Siddell who died from a gunshot wound to her head, and her husband Arthur was later arrested for her death, with the police saying the couple often engaged in sexual fantasies involving a gun. So, I guess if I end up mysteriously stabbed a million times, the police will just look at all the crazy true crime stories I search up and assume I committed suicide. Good to know. There's another news story about the death of a woman in like a bathtub, and then a few days later, there's some searches for Zoloft on January 6th, 2011, and that's right around the time that Ellen would have been prescribed this by her psychiatrist, Dr. Ellen Berman. On that same day, there are some searches for Prozac, its side effects and benefits, and then as January progresses, some more websites discussing recent true crime cases. Then, on January 10th, 2011, we have a Google search for quick suicide, and someone viewed an article on The Age titled Euthanasia, a Dangerous Weapon, and then a utopian.com article about painless suicide. So I went to this page because I think that's important. If she was searching up painless suicide, let's look into this more. And this webpage actually threw me for a loop, man. So it starts off, pretty much true to the article, a true painless method of suicide, easiest and simplest painless suicide method. How to commit suicide. Best of painless suicide methods. Are you looking for a painless method to end your life? Painless death? A quick way to commit suicide and or a clean way to die? If so, you have come to the right place. Methods like slitting wrists, cutting throat, poisons, suffocation, jumping off a cliff, or tall buildings are not painless methods of suicide, not even inhaling carbon monoxide. Why? And here's where the beat drops.
Because the real pain comes after death, being burnt eternally in hell.
The Bible teaches that all non-believers are destined for hell. Some people accuse us of condemning people or playing God, but before you arrive at this conclusion, please read our below section in red. Christ loves us by allowing the condemnation to be on him and died for our sins so that we can live, and all we have to do is embrace him. Most people misunderstood that once a person dies, that's the end of life. That is not true. Okay, I'm done with this. I just did not expect it to go in that direction at all. It shocked me a little bit. But here's the thing. Ellen was Jewish, right? This is a Christian website. Jewish people don't believe in all of the same things that Christians believe. And why would someone who was devout in their faith be looking at Christian websites for advice? This website talks about Jesus and, how he views you taking your own life and how he died for your sins and he took your sins on you. All you have to do is accept him, et cetera, et cetera. But Jesus is not part of the Jewish theology. He's not considered like a divine being capable of taking on your sins or forgiving your sins. So why would Ellen even be looking at a web page like this? And if Ellen was looking for painless ways to take her own life, why would she end up doing it in the most painful and torturous way possible, right? Painless methods to take your own life, all of these things, and then, nope, I'm just going to stab myself with this kitchen knife 10 times in the back. Now here's Guy DeAndrea explaining why the internet searches seemed odd to him as well.
That Ellen or someone had searched for pain-free or painless ways to commit suicide. Here's what I'll tell you about the computer and what was or was not contained in the original case file. So first, when I reviewed the case file, and again, I had it for months, if not years, closer to years actually, before I left the district attorney's office, there were no computer searches at all. So not that there were computer searches that showed suicide or not suicide, there just weren't any searches in that file. So one of the questions I've always had since leaving the office is, now that these searches have come out, it's who performed them, where were they performed, how were they performed, and a lot of other questions concerning that particular topic. So that's not a great answer in terms of who did the searches, but I have a lot of questions about that as well, because again, that was not contained in my file. So I would like to know where those searches came from as well. What I can tell you about the computer is that on the scene, after Ellen was found and the police were notified and arrived, the electronics were given to, which was a computer and several other electronic devices, they were returned to, or not returned to, but rather given to Ellen's fiance at the time, as well as his family. I don't know why that was done. It wasn't documented in the file why that was done. I don't know why that was done. I never got a good answer for that. I will tell you that those devices were ultimately turned back over to the Philadelphia Police Department several days after they were given to the fiance and his family. And so what does that mean from a legal perspective? Well, there's a couple of things that I did want to address, and I don't want to go too far into the weeds with this, but there is, and I don't mean to insult anyone's intelligence, but there is a concept in criminal law that's called chain of custody. And what that means is when the police recover evidence from any scene, they have to maintain that evidence, and they have to create a log of where it was, who touched it, when they touched it. So it's not just about whether or not a civilian touched it, but the log has to include everyone within the chain. In other words, who had that evidence. So if you are going to use reliable and credible evidence, it must maintain its integrity, which is the chain of custody, and it was broken here.
Additionally, we have a report from a man named Louis A. Lazarus, PhD, completed on September 20th, 2019. Now, Lazarus is a clinical neuropsychologist who gave his psychological opinion regarding the nature of Ellen's death. Lazarus says that there is no evidence that Ellen herself did any of these internet searches, and in his opinion, the information from these searches was more of a red herring than anything else and not relevant to Ellen's mental state. A lot of people also said they could be shadow searches because she was looking at true crime content, and sometimes, these sites like utopia.com, they'll advertise on these pages and you might accidentally click on it, not meaning to, pop-ups, things like that. And I mean, this is 2011, so yeah, it was the time of pop-ups. Lazarus mentions that Ellen did not show any signs or symptoms of suicidal ideation at or around the time of her death or at any point in her history, and there's no family history of mental health illness. The report also talks about a notebook that was allegedly recovered from the scene, which contained information about medication that Ellen was taking as well as her state of mind while she was taking it. But this notebook was not made available for Lazarus to review. And Lazarus says, quote, "With respect to the means of committing suicide, it has been noted that suicide by the way of sharp instruments accounts for approximately 2 to 3% of suicides, and majority by males," end quote. Lazarus also mentions that the nature and location of Ellen's wounds are helpful when making a determination of suicide versus homicide. So things like hesitation marks would often be found in cases where suicide is achieved by way of a sharp object. And hesitation marks are basically when you're, trying to hurt yourself, you sort of go in lighter at first to see how much does it hurt, work up the bravery, work up your courage, whatever. But none of Ellen's wounds described and observed in the records could be considered representative of a hesitation wound. Lazarus also went on to say, quote, "The trajectory of self-inflicted wounds is typically uniform, unlike what was Miss Greenberg's situation," end quote. Because Ellen had stab wounds, but they were coming from all different directions, right? Going up, going down, from the side, all different directions. Almost as if somebody stabbed her. According to Dr. Lazarus, Ellen's behavior didn't line up with what is often seen in cases where people take their own lives. No saying goodbye to friends, no giving away of possessions or getting her affairs in order, no suicide note left behind to explain why she had made this decision. Lazarus said, quote, "An additional behavior that is often demonstrated in suicides, which was not present in Miss Goldberg's case, is the removal of clothing and being found in the position in which the inflicted wounds were sustained." In Miss Greenberg's case, she was stabbed through her clothing, and experts have clearly indicated that her final resting place was not in the position in which she was when inflicted with the knife wounds, end quote. And I'm going to talk about that her position was not the original position when she started, being stabbed. But let's talk about the internet searches for a minute, because I think that even if the internet searches were truly made by Ellen, they certainly don't give us enough to say beyond the shadow of a doubt that she took her own life or that she was even considering it. Additionally, since those laptops were out of law enforcement's hands for several days and in the hands of someone close to the one person that could be considered a suspect in her death, anything found on her computer is irrelevant. If the chain of custody being broken makes the information found on her computers inadmissible in court, it should also make that information inadmissible in deciding whether Ellen died via homicide or suicide. But apparently the district's attorney office, they don't think that. In September of 2019, the Greenbergs and their attorney formally requested that Dr. Marlon Osborne, the medical examiner who performed Ellen's autopsy, voluntarily amend Ellen's death certificate to reflect a manner of death other than suicide, based on additional medical and other information which Dr. Osborne would not have been familiar with in early 2011. And we are going to talk about that information now. So in 2012, the Greenbergs approached well-known forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht. He's going to be at CrimeCon this coming week. I'm so excited. And Cyril Wecht, he reviewed the records and the materials connected to Ellen's death, and he had some interesting takeaways. He said, quote, "Suicidal stab wounds can rarely be multiple. Suicides by stabbing are becoming less frequent, with simpler choices being drugs, hanging, or gunshot. Cutting of the wrist and throat is often associated with suicide, whereas stab wounds to the back are unlikely to be suicide. A murder usually involves multiple stab wounds to the side, back, or stomach. In a suicide, there may be additional cuts across the wrist or tentative stabbings to see if it will hurt or to work up the courage. Then there will usually only be one wound and most likely in the chest," end quote. So Cyril Wecht felt that the multiple stab wounds to the back and upper neck and lower head, they were unlikely suicide stab wounds, especially considering, once again, they're going in different directions. Some vertically left to right, some going vertically straight, some going horizontally left to right. Dr. Cyril Wecht concluded saying, quote, "Based upon a reasonable degree of medical certainty, it is my professional opinion that the manner of the death of Ellen Greenberg is strongly suspicious of homicide," end quote. Okay, but he's just one person, right? It's subjective. I agree there. I think it's a much stronger argument if you have multiple experts who all see the same thing. It's just like getting a second opinion when you go to the doctor. So now we also have Dr. Wayne K. Ross, a forensic pathology specialist who also reviewed all the pertinent information in Ellen's case. Now, not only did Ross conclude that the evidence of a stab wound through Ellen's cranial cavity would have caused her to, once again, experience severe pain, cranial nerve damage and dysfunction, and traumatic brain signs and symptoms, such as numbness, tingling, respiratory depression, neurogenic shock, and impaired or loss of consciousness, but Dr. Ross found evidence of strangulation on Ellen's body in the crime scene photos and autopsy report. He said, quote, "There was a mark over the front of the neck, which was consistent with a fingernail mark. There were multiple bruises under the neck and in the strap muscles over the right side of the neck. The patterns were compatible with manual strangulation," end quote. Wayne Ross also noted multiple bruises on Ellen's body in different stages of healing, which were consistent with repeated beatings. And his conclusion was, quote, "The scene findings were indicative of a homicide," end quote. Let's go back to Dr. Ross's opinion on Ellen's spinal cord, which we were told was intact based on a one-sentence mention in the autopsy report from a forensic neuropathologist who can't even remember being on the case or billing for her time on the case. It was discovered that a piece of Ellen's spinal cord had been kept in storage at the medical examiner's office. And so Wayne Ross was able to examine it, and he claimed that it had in fact been penetrated and damaged, which would have made additional self-inflicted stab wounds pretty much impossible. Ellen suffered a significant wound to the base of her skull, which penetrated her brain by several centimeters. And this particular wound resulted from an upward strike to the base of her skull that would have been difficult, if not impossible, for her to have inflicted on herself. And don't just hold your hand here, because you can try it out. Don't hold your hand here. Remember, you're holding a knife. It's a long knife. You're going to hold it at the handle. You've got to go back far enough to put enough pressure to penetrate the skull and the brain. And how would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, look, can't even get my hand back far enough. Okay, and then to go up? Ow! To go up? No! It hurts. It's not natural. Additionally, there's also evidence that some of the stab wounds to Ellen's body were possibly made after she was already dead, which obviously makes it difficult for her to have inflicted them on herself. Dr. Lindsay Emery, a state-hired neuropathologist, she claimed during a deposition that there was no hemorrhaging in the spinal cord.
Have you ever been deposed before?
Yes.
Now, this deposition of a city-hired medical expert reveals testimony that corroborates those images, according to the Greenberg's family attorney, Joe Pedraza.
In this neuropathologist's best determination, Ellen wasn't alive when she was stabbed.
The deposition is of neuropathologist Lindsay Emery. She was hired by Philadelphia to review Ellen Greenberg's spinal cord a few years ago. Watch as Emery reveals her findings for the first time to the Greenberg's attorney, Joe Pedraza.
What's significant here is that there's no hemorrhage.
And in your experience, no hemorrhage can equate to the person having been deceased at the time of the administration of the trauma.
Yeah, I mean, in general, no hemorrhage means no pulse.
People without pulses do not stab themselves repeatedly. So that by itself establishes suicide is absolutely impossible in this case.
Corroborates what we've always thought. This was not a suicide. This was a vicious homicide.
Now, just to tell you, because the state hired her, right? Philadelphia, Pennsylvania hired Dr. Lindsay Emery, and they were like, oh, she was mistaken in her deposition. Okay. And Dr. Wayne Ross also brought forward strong evidence that more than one knife had been used to stab Ellen, one with a serrated blade, like the one recovered from her body, and one with a smooth blade. And this is noted in her autopsy report that some of her wounds have serrated edges while some are smoother. Now, where's that knife? We don't know if there was a knife missing from the knife block. We don't know if there was another knife found. I'm going to go ahead and say that if she was stabbed with two knives, she didn't kill herself. And especially if that knife couldn't be found with her blood on it, she couldn't have, taken it out, cleaned her blood off, and put it back on the counter. So any evidence that there was two knives used to stab Ellen would lean very much more towards homicide than suicide. Now, due to his findings, Dr. Wayne Ross contacted Detective Scott Eelman, who specializes in crime scene reconstruction and evidence processing and management. And one of the things that really confused many of the professionals involved with this case was the direction of the blood flow on Ellen's body, on her face, and located at the scene of her death. Images of Ellen at the scene show a stream of blood running horizontally across her cheek from the side of her nose towards her left ear, but her body was found upright and slumped forward. Police claimed that Ellen had stabbed herself while she was in a standing position and then slid to the floor, which does not explain the direction of blood flow. Guy DeAndrea said, quote, "The blood flow path defies gravity. You don't need to be a pathologist to have an appreciation for that. Either she moved herself or someone moved her," end quote. Now, Detective Eelman, he focused on this blood flow problem in his report. According to crime scene photos, Ellen was found in the corner of the kitchen area between the sink and the stove. Her back was leaning against the corner cabinet, and she was slumped forward with her feet and arms extended. Her head was found to be tilted slightly forward and to the right, with her chin resting against her right shoulder and the right side of her head resting against the corner kitchen cabinet. In Eelman's report, it says, quote, "The bloodstains on her face are inconsistent with the position in which she was found. Specifically, the blood stain flow pattern diagonally across her forehead from the right to the left and terminating in her right eyebrow would move against the law of gravity. This particular flow pattern indicates that her head was tilted slightly backwards and to the left as the origination of that blood occurred in the hairline, somewhere above and to the right of the anterior forehead. The blood flow from the medial corner of the left eye has several branches. The branch closest to the nose would be consistent with the position in which she was found. It flows along the left side of the nose and terminates under the left nostril. The remaining branches of this complex bloodstain do not comport with the position in which she was found. A significant amount of blood flowed from the medial corner of her left eye, moved across her left cheek, and across the surface of a raised cheekbone. From there, this complex bloodstain has several branches which indicate her head was in different positions as this blood flowed, end quote. So basically, if her head was in the position that the police found it, and they took pictures of her, right? It didn't make sense how the blood flow was going on her face. Her head was bent like this, but the blood flow is going the opposite way, which it wouldn't do, and over a raised cheekbone as well, which, I mean, this is some pretty strong blood. This blood is like a pioneer in a covered wagon going through the roughest of terrains to get to its goal, you know? That's just not physically possible. The report goes on to describe each of the paths that the blood took, and they don't make sense with how Ellen would have been positioned when she stabbed herself, or how she would have been positioned when she slumped down and ended in like this slouch-seated position.
If you take a look at the victim is sitting in the corner like this, and there's dried and coagulated blood running from the nose to the ear, okay? How should that, if it's dried and coagulated, should that be running horizontally or vertically?
Right.
Okay, it should be running down the face. Well, it's running from the nose to the ear. So that's the first thing I noticed. And I looked at it and I said, the body's been moved.
She when that blood dried, she would have been laying flat on the ground.
Flat, right. Flat,
and she was moved to be put in that corner.
Right. And if you listen to the 911 call, Sam will even say, she's on her back.
So Sam told the 911 operator that Ellen was on her back. The evidence shows she was on her back. So how the hell did she get moved to be in a seated position propped against the kitchen cabinets? Who moved her? Why was she moved? Scott Eelman concluded that in his opinion, Ellen was not in the position that she was found at the time the blood was deposited on her sweatpants, sweatshirts, and shoes. He felt that Ellen's head had been in several positions during the time of blood flow, and it remained in these positions long enough to have the blood flow across her face and back towards her ear, upward towards her eyes, and also downwards towards her chin. Circular and elliptical shaped blood stains were found on Ellen's sweatshirt, and this indicates that the source of blood would be from above that level, most likely coming from her head wounds or her neck wounds. These blood stains were consistent with dropped blood, and they indicated that her head was tilted forward at the time they were dropped from her wounds. So when the blood came out of her wounds, her head would have been slumped forward like this. Similar bloodstains on Ellen's sweatpants were consistent with Ellen being in a seated position, with her head leaning forward and her feet flat on the floor, seen by what is called void patterns to the upper portion of the sweatpants between Ellen's waist and upper legs. So for clarification, a void pattern occurs when a person or an object is blocking the path of blood, and these void patterns are very important to a crime scene because they can show investigators at that scene if something is missing, where a person was at the time of the incident, or if the body was moved. I mean, I guess it's important to like most investigators, but not the Philadelphia Police Department. So when Ellen's found, she's sitting against the wall with her legs straight out. But according to her blood patterns, she was like this. That. Right? Does this make sense? With like her knees pushed up against her. Scott Eelman said, quote, "Should Miss Greenberg have been standing at the time of the blood being dropped onto her upper pants, these bloodstains would be elliptical in nature with some evidence of directionality. One would expect to find bloodstains on the lower pant legs as well," end quote. Now, these bloodstains, they were circular, not elliptical. That means they didn't have a lot of time to sort of fall, right? So the blood's going to keep a circular pattern the less area it has to fall. So if it's coming from like her neck wound and her legs are like right up here, it's going to remain circular. But if she's standing up and the blood has to fall from her neck wounds or her head wounds all the way down to her pants, it's going to get like, because of gravity, like lengthened out and be more elliptical. The report says that the number and volume of blood drops on Ellen's sweatshirt, sweatpants, and boots is significant. Like there's a lot of it. However, the number of blood stains on the floor is minimal compared to what was found on her person. Swipe patterns were also found at the scene, and this led Scott Eelman to believe that Ellen's body had been moved after her death. The report says, quote, swipe patterns noted on the sink side cabinet face of the corner cabinet indicate Miss Greenberg's bloody hair came in contact with this cabinet face. The first contact was near the opening side of the cabinet face and moved rearward. Her head was then separated from the cabinet face and later reconnected the cabinet face in a lower position than the original contact where it moved backward and slightly downward, end quote. Of special interest to Scott Eelman was a bloodstain on the floor between Ellen's right hand and her glasses. The bloodstain had a hard edge to it, meaning that something or someone had gotten in the way, preventing the flow of blood, or the blood was moved or altered in some way. Now, in the photographs, Scott Eelman did think he noticed an area of pinkish discoloration at the lower edge of this bloodstain, which he felt might suggest there had been an attempt to clean it up. There was also a pattern in the bloodstain that may have been consistent with footwear, like a footwear pattern on the bottom of your shoe, or something else, basically like someone walked on or through that blood. And Detective Scott Eelman did not think that the blood located on the bottom of Ellen's Ugg boots matched that pattern, and there wasn't enough on the bottom of her boots. Which I feel like if you stabbed yourself in a standing position and then slid down to the floor, you wouldn't have any blood on the bottom of your boots, right? Another well-known forensic expert, Dr. Henry Lee, he also weighed in, and in a report authored by Henry Lee and Elaine Pagliaro, evidence noted by Scott Eelman was elaborated on. The report says that swipe-type patterns seen on the cabinet corner areas are consistent with Ellen falling to the floor, indicating that she had received some of her wounds while standing up, which was also supported by the blood spatter-type patterns and a blood dripping in a downward direction on the cabinet located to Ellen's right. So basically the blood started higher on the cabinet and then dripped down, so she was most likely in a standing position when she was stabbed. And once again, many of these experts say this isn't typical in a suicide. Usually you would get in the position that you're going to end up in when you take your own life. That's why people do it in bed or seated in their favorite comfortable chair. The report says, quote, there are at least 300 to 400 blood drops on her upper thighs and waist area. These stains are consistent with vertical blood drops formed when blood fell from her wounds onto this area while she was in a sitting position. There is also blood on the floor between her legs. Based on the appearance of the bloodstains and their locations, these are consistent with the knife being inserted at the area where she was found. So they mean like it all happened there in the kitchen. She wasn't stabbed somewhere else. She wasn't moved from the kitchen, but her body was probably moved once she was in the kitchen. The report continues, saying she later fell onto the floor with the dripping wounds over her legs, end quote. Dr. Lee goes on to describe bloodstains on Ellen's lower legs and the top of her boots, stating that some of the stains appeared to be the result of vertical blood drops, and based on the number and distribution of the drops, they were consistent with having been from Ellen's initial injuries. So, as we suspected, Ellen seems to have been attacked from behind. She was stabbed, and she slid down to the floor where she was stabbed some more, because they believe that those first stab wounds were in the neck and head, and the last stab wound was in her chest. Henry Lee said that the location of several of Ellen's wounds were located in a place that would have been difficult for her to do to herself. Yes, absolutely. And he concluded that the number and type of wounds, along with the bloodstain patterns observed, were consistent with a homicide scene. The Greenbergs also entered into evidence a 3D anatomical recreation of Ellen's wounds conducted by Biomechanical Consulting in Norfolk, Virginia. This recreation illustrates the size, depth, and angle of each of the wounds on Ellen's body.
Draza plans to prove once and for all the case is a homicide using a technology called photogrammetry.
It's an actual recreation of Ellen's anatomical and physiological attributes.
He exclusively shared these images with Eyewitness News, explaining it would be impossible for Greenberg to stab herself in the back of her head multiple times.
It is clear beyond any medical certainty.
Biomechanical concluded that the back, head, and neck stab wounds were not biomechanically consistent with self-infliction, and they would have required multiple intentional dynamic motions of the proximal and distal radial ulnar joints. So, the proximal joint is located near the elbow, the distal is located near the wrist. They're both classified as pivot joints, but they can only pivot so far, you know? I showed you that it would be pretty difficult and go against what my body wants to do, to take a knife this far back away from my head because there's a handle on it and I got to put the tip of the blade on my head. And once I do this, it would be very difficult to get enough to go up. It hurts. It hurts. The report also said that even non-penetrating trauma to the back of the head and neck would have caused disruption to Ellen's proprioceptors. And this is very interesting. I had to look this up. Proprioceptors are like sensory receptors in the body. They're found mainly in the muscles, tendon, and skin. Muscle spindles, those are known as stretch receptors. They're very sensitive to changes in muscle length, and they allow you to know when and how far you can stretch your arms when reaching. Now, the purpose of this is to protect your body by sending signals to the brain. So, for instance, if you're lifting weights that you're not strong enough for, they're too heavy for you, you're going to have trouble lifting those weights because the proprioceptors are getting a message from the brain saying that these weights are too heavy for the muscle. And the proprioceptors are going to be like, no, we're not doing this. And the person doing this lifting will either get this message, listen to their body, and try lighter weights when they're physically incapable of lifting the weights they've chosen, or they'll continue to try and lift the weights, causing injury to themselves. They call it like the sixth sense of the body. It's very, very cool. Basically, this report is saying like she would have hurt herself, even non-penetrating trauma. So even if she just put the knife back here and wasn't able to get enough force to stab herself through her skull, which I don't think she would have. Guys, try it yourself. Look at these pictures, okay? Try it yourself. I don't think she would have had enough force to shove that knife through her skull in the position her arm was in. They're saying even non-penetrating force would have caused those proprioceptors to basically scream out and say, no, we can't do this. This isn't the way our body's supposed to move. And once again, Gavin Fish, shout out to Gavin Fish. Guys, go over and subscribe to him. He has some great work done on Ellen. I really like the way his videos are formatted. I like the way he does investigations. I like the way his brain works. So check him out, follow him. But Gavin, he wanted to reenact this to see if Ellen would have been physically capable of doing this. And he enlisted the help of his wife, who has similar body proportions to Ellen.
Ellen Greenberg was 5'7", 136 pounds. Turns out that my wife is 5'7", 136 pounds. So we thought that she would be a good avatar for Ellen Greenberg if we were to recreate the wounds that she supposedly made to herself, right? Now, we are much older than Ellen Greenberg was when she died.
She could be our daughter.
Yes. But Kimberly actually has a pretty good range of motion. So we kind of feel like, because of her exercise, the yoga and Pilates and stuff, that if anybody could,
that
she would do it.
Flexibility is there. Yeah,
Yes.
If anybody.
So what we've got here, guys, is a stir stick, because I didn't want my wife to be stabbing herself with a knife. So I've marked off the size that, Ellen Greenberg, that basically, this is the handle, and then the other side, it would be the blade. And the idea, love, being that also because it's a flat thing, we can put it in the right orientation, right?
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to get this perfectly, but if we take a look at this one, which is L, it is situated kind of between the ears, closer to there, and it's rather up and down. It's about like that.
And she is right-handed.
Well, oh yeah, she had a towel in her left hand. So go ahead and grab that. But it can't be up like that, it has to be like that.
Okay.
But you're holding the blade, so
It
move
needs to be back.
Yeah. Okay, and
And it has to be up
that's
here.
no, it's upward facing. So okay, so now you know kind of where it is.
Okay.
You think you can stab yourself like that?
Okay, this, can you tell by my voice, this is a huge effort.
You're really, how much pressure can you put on yourself?
From that angle?
Yeah.
Well, and okay.
Yeah, you can stop. Does it feel...
I mean, you can clearly see that this position, it doesn't even look normal or comfortable. And if someone was going to stab themselves in the back of the head, they would probably do it in a position that felt natural to their body, which this clearly doesn't to Kimberly. And my arm still hurts from trying to do it.
Okay, now there's one kind of, so it's higher and it's more in the center of the head, so it's like about there.
Okay, getting closer will be more doable. Where, put it in the right spot.
Yeah. Just, so if you were to go from the one before to that one, yeah, I don't see that as working. Okay, so that has to kind of, you turn your head a little bit like that. Okay, let's do the next one. There are two kind of straight in, like at the base here. So like that. If you're going to commit suicide, it seems like an awfully hard way to commit suicide.
Okay, I have very long arms, right? I have very long arms, and I do yoga. I can do a bridge and mermaid, and for anybody who knows, that I have the flexibility. That is challenging to even get to that spot.
Would you say, for a 46-year-old woman, you are flexible, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay. For a 27-year-old woman, would you consider yourself very flexible?
Yes.
Right? The average woman would not be able to do that.
Right. That's where it puts, oh my goodness, but I would have to come up here and have...
Oh yeah, your range of motion has to come from the top.
It has to come from out here. How do you get that from over
in order for, so stay right where you are, let me grab this.
Mm-hmm.
So let go of it. Mm-hmm. In order for it to come in this way, then your arm would have to be pointed back, right? And go as far as you can, in order to, when you bend your elbow and make that thrusting move, it has to come from the top, right?
Right.
And then none of these wounds, none of them come at a downward angle, right? They're all coming in straight from the back. So this is what I think. I think I'm the assailant. I'm 6'2". I don't know how tall her fiance was, and you're just wearing regular shoes, little heels. Little heels. Yeah. So about there. At 6'2", I can come in straight. I can come in straight, with a stabbing motion. I can come in straight. My belief is that it started over here and went boom, 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 boom. And he wasn't moving, she was turning this direction.
I mean, come on, we can all admit this would be incredibly difficult to do, right? And Ellen would not have been trying to prove her flexibility to anyone. You know, she's not like in Cirque du Soleil. She's not like trying to attempt to make her self-inflicted death as difficult as humanly possible. So why is anyone with two brain cells to rub together expected to believe that Ellen did this to herself? The medical examiner who did Ellen's autopsy was questioned for the civil suit, and here's what he has to say.
The evidence includes this never-before publicly seen deposition of then Assistant Philadelphia Medical Examiner Marlon Osborne. The Greenbergs say he's the man who ruled Ellen's death a suicide. Watch as the Greenbergs' family attorney question Osborne.
If it could be proven that one or more of the wounds that Ellen sustained could not have been inflicted by her.
Objection.
Would you agree with me that the manner of death as suicide would be improper or incorrect?
Osborne waits several seconds before he answers.
I would have to agree.
Well, I mean, thank God, Marlon Osborne, thank God that we can at least all agree on something, which is if one or more of Ellen's wounds were not self-inflicted, she most likely did not kill herself. And I think there's a plethora of evidence that suggests just that. I mean, there's 20 stab wounds, 10 of them to the back of her body. Why would you stab yourself like that? Why would you do that? You don't need to do that. Now remember, the Attorney General's office, the State Attorney General's office, they claimed they did a thorough investigation on this case, which apparently did not include speaking to any of the experts that the Greenberg family had brought in to give their opinion on the case, and they never examined the spinal cord specimen either. And where is that video that building manager Melissa Ware had taken before the cleaning crew came in? She claims she provided it to the police, but in an email dated May 25th, 2021, attorney Ellen Berkowitz, the lawyer for the city of Philadelphia, claims there's no videotape in Ellen's file other than surveillance footage, which had already been provided. Ellen Berkowitz has also indicated that there were 3 documents related to Dr. Marlon Osborne that she would give to the Greenberg's legal team if they withdrew their motion to compel those documents, as well as further motions related to the medical examiner's office. She wrote in an email, quote, "I'm willing to give you the documents now if you agree to withdraw the motion. Why do you need to see them first? This is all there is," end quote. There's a ton of back and forth about these files and evidence that was supposed to be released to the Greenberg legal team. And, you know, Berkowitz was really dragging her feet. There was always some excuse to push it off, like her father was sick, she was out of town. And then an outright tit for tat, right? You do this, and I'll give you what you want. Why the games? Why the back and forth? Why? There's somebody's life on the line here, like somebody's life, the way they're remembered, their justice. There could be a killer on the loose. Why the games? And in Dr. Marlon Osborne's own deposition, he admits that he initially believed he'd had enough information to make the determination of homicide. He says that from his exam, he thought there was injury to Ellen's spinal cord, but he wasn't certain, so he consulted with other associates and decided to have the spinal cord looked at by a neuropathologist, which would have happened within a day or two, or just weeks after he completed the autopsy, but we know that this alleged neuropathologist doesn't remember ever being called in to do this. Marlon Osborne said, quote, "Again, I was not completely 100% certain that there was actual injury to the spinal cord, and if so, the question was, if there was injury, how severe would it be? Which the question would be, would Miss Greenberg not be able to continue to inflict injury to herself because of this injury?" End quote. Yeah. Definitely the question, right? If she severed her spinal cord, if she did damage to her spinal cord, it would be incredibly difficult for her to continue stabbing herself. But remember that this neuropathologist, Dr. Lucy Rourke Adams, she couldn't remember being brought on this case. She had no paperwork of her charging for her work on the case. No corresponding report was ever found to support the one-sentence claim in the autopsy report that Ellen's spinal cord was not damaged. And then you had another neuropathologist, 2 more neuropathologists examine the spinal cord and say that there was damage present. And then Dr. Osborne had a meeting with the police and the district attorney after he had said that Ellen's death was a homicide, and he claims they gave him new information that was not available at the time that he determined Ellen had died from a homicide. He claims now he was presented with psychiatric records. Prior to this, he was also contacted by the lead investigator on Ellen's case, who requested that Osborne change the manner of death from homicide to suicide while the police kept looking into it. You would think, right? My shoulder really hurts from trying to do that, by the way. It really hurts. And I'm pretty limber, all right? I do yoga. I'm flexible. I can touch my hands together. I can touch my hands together at the back. Look. Huh? What do you think? Can you see? Can you see? Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. All right, I'm pretty limber and this hurts. This hurts. Why the hell would you do this? So anyways, back to this. You would think that if you were going to change the manner of death to a victim's death certificate prior to the investigation being completed, you would change it to undetermined. That's suicide, right? Why would you change it from homicide to suicide if the police are like, we're still investigating, we don't know for sure if it was a homicide, so change it to suicide? It doesn't make any sense. And all the Greenbergs want at this point is for the manner of death to be changed to undetermined so that the case can be reopened. But the powers that be refuse to even move an iota on that matter.
What do we do now? I mean, obviously it needs to be reinvestigated. So we asked the Attorney General, is there anything you can do yesterday? And he wrote back in a statement, we've looked at all, no, we're not going to reopen this case as of now. He needs more evidence, he says. What is heart, he goes into how it's heartbreaking and all that, but he says they don't have legitimate new evidence to bring forward. It has not been brought forward yet, so we're not going to do anything. So what can we do?
They don't have legitimate new evidence? Final answer, guys? Final answer? It's absolutely ludicrous that no one with the power to do so will help these grieving parents. The Greenbergs don't want anyone hauled away in handcuffs and thrown into prison. They simply want the case looked at again and to be given a fair shot. In February of 2022, the Attorney General's office has now closed the case, still claiming that suicide makes sense in the face of all the glaring evidence that it absolutely does not. And I'm specifically referring to Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania's Attorney General, who this year will be running for governor of the state. And he is the only man who has the power to open the door that might lead to justice for Ellen and her family. And I don't think it's a huge stretch to mention that given Sam Goldberg's Uncle James's prominence in legal and political circles around Philadelphia, Shapiro and Uncle James, they might have some sort of professional or even personal relationship. That's certainly a conflict of interest if that's the case. So, even the state's AG office should not have been on this case if that is true. If Uncle James and Shapiro, the AG of the state, have a friendship or a professional relationship, the state's AG should not have been responsible for that case, for that investigation. They should have brought in a special prosecutor, period. Now, is there a chance that Ellen Greenberg took her own life? I mean, of course, sure, right? Anything is possible. All anyone wants is the case reopened so that it can be stated with certainty. Because I truly don't think anyone can look at what happened to Ellen and say, yeah, cut and dry suicide absolutely makes sense. Nothing to see here. Ellen was having some problems with anxiety, and she even mentioned wanting to move back home. And there's clear evidence of long-term physical abuse on her body. That cannot be debated. That cannot be disputed. And it's true that Ellen never told anyone outright that she was in an abusive relationship, but people usually don't share that with their friends or family because they're afraid that they might patch things up with their significant other, and then their friends and their family and the people they love, they'll never get over what she told them that he did to her. And it's always going to be awkward and strained, and there's a wedding coming up in 7 months. In my opinion, just from those texts that Sam sent Ellen while he was outside of the apartment trying to get in, they show that he wasn't very nice to her. Just because somebody locked the door while you were out of it doesn't mean you can be like, oh, you have no idea. You better have a good excuse for this. That tells me that if he was responsible for what happened to her, I'm not saying he was, allegedly don't come for me, but if he was responsible for what happened to her, he sent those texts as a cover-up to show that he was trying to get in touch with her and he was trying to get in the apartment. And he sent those texts thinking that they don't seem wrong. They don't seem like mean. They don't seem like verbally and emotionally abusive. They're threatening. They're scary. What if she took a nap because she was tired? And you're going to be out there texting her like, you have no idea. You better have a good excuse. What the fuck? Ugh. What is that? That's somebody that's got a temper. That's somebody that's got a temper. And clearly, he didn't think there was anything wrong with writing those texts while she was dead inside the apartment, which means that he doesn't think there is anything wrong with it, which means that when he's not thinking he's being watched or looked at, he's probably worse. Probably is worse of a temper. That's just my opinion. Allegedly. Don't come for me. First Amendment. Freedom of speech. And I can't get over that 911 call, man. Like, he never truly sounds panicked. He never truly sounds stressed out. When she says, you got to calm down, sir, we can't help you, he calms down right away. And he talks very conversationally. When he sees that knife in her chest, he's like, oh my, there's a knife here. Wow, that's crazy. What's a knife doing in her chest? It's not like, oh my God, somebody stabbed her. There's a knife in her chest. What the hell is going on? Like some panic, some literal shock. He seems super chill, almost like it's not the first time he's seen the knife in her chest, but that's just my opinion. We might also be looking at a police department who made a snap decision much too quickly based on, might I add, a simple statement from the only person who was in the apartment with Ellen that day. Oh, the door was locked from the inside? That must be true. Case closed. No one knows if the door is actually locked from the inside when Sam Goldberg came back from the gym. It's just what he claimed. And yes, the neighbors did hear him banging on the door and calling her name. And yes, he did text her. But that's what he would have done if he was trying to make it seem like the door was locked from the inside, right? That small amount of damage that was done to that lock, I just don't see how that would be so small and so inconsequential if you literally broke the door down. That small amount of damage could have easily been done from the inside of that apartment to make it look as if he had to break the door down. Like, it's literally, like, those nails were rusted. All you have to do is, like, get something in between the metal part and then just pry, and it will come right off. So, like, what kind of police force are we talking about here? What kind of backwards, lazy-ass police work are we looking at here? Okay, sir, well, the door was locked from the inside, so you must be completely innocent, even though many women who are killed at the hands of their partners. It's crazy to me. Like, oh, the door was locked from the inside. I don't think it ever was locked from the inside. He's the only one that said it was. And that's why he said the doorman was with him when he broke it down. That's why he said Phil Hanton was with him when he broke it down, because that proves that it was locked from the inside if you have to break it down. But Phil Hanton was not with him. Phil Hanton said never, not once was he with him when he broke that door down. I'm not saying that Sam Goldberg is responsible for Ellen's death. Of course not. But I am saying it's irresponsible and disrespectful to have completed a backwards investigation and then look us in the eye and tell us it was a thorough one. The police did a really bad job here. And when they found out that the ME had ruled Ellen's death a homicide after they'd given the green light for the crime scene to be cleaned, they panicked and they bullied him into changing it, in my opinion, to cover their own asses and maybe someone else's too. It's unacceptable, and we cannot let it stand. That kind of thinking offers protection to no one who has ever experienced a bout of anxiety or depression. I'm telling you, better make sure no one murders you if you've ever seen a psychiatrist or taken medication for mental health or confided in friends or family that you're going through a rough time, because apparently that's enough for the law to write your death off as a suicide without even giving it a second thought or the care and time that your life deserved. I truly think this is what happened in the Phoebe Hanschuk case as well. She committed suicide by throwing herself down a garbage chute. Like, come on, man. It's disgusting. I'm disgusted. And I hope you are as well, because now it's time to take action. There's a petition for the Pennsylvania Attorney General that you can sign. Get on Twitter if you have to. At the shit out of Shapiro, write letters, make phone calls. All the contact information is in the petition, which I've linked below. Especially if you live in the state of Pennsylvania, make some noise. Because as a taxpayer, you have the right to make sure that the politicians you voted in are doing the right thing for the people, the ones they're supposedly public servants to. Like I said, under the petition, you can find multiple ways to contact Josh Shapiro, because if he wants to be governor of the great state of Pennsylvania, he better start acting like someone who gives a shit about the people who live there, and that includes Ellen. Seriously, guys, make some noise. Go sign the petition, add him, do everything possible, just like we did for Praveen, just like we've done in the past, for these victims who deserve justice, and they deserve their story told, and they deserve to have their voice back and not just written off, because it's easier for the people involved. And that's what it really is. And every single person who's working in that attorney general's office who claimed like, oh, yeah, we did a thorough investigation, you're full of shit. That's bullshit. You did not. You did not. but you don't want to make waves, because the reason anybody goes into the attorney general's office is to one day become a judge and one day have tenure and one day, basically be able to make all sorts of crazy calls and not ever be held responsible for them like we know judges do. That's the reason somebody goes into the attorney general's office instead of private practice. And they don't want to make waves and they don't want to push back, because they know then they won't achieve what they want to achieve. They won't reach their dreams. They won't reach the heights that they think they can reach if they start standing up for the little guy. But the little guy is who you're supposed to be standing up for. Like, that's your one job. It's your only purpose. And it seems they've forgotten this. The police, the lawyers, the attorney general, the district attorneys, all of these people, they've forgotten who puts them there, who pays their salaries. And we need to remind them. Okay, thank you so much for being here, guys. I'm losing my voice completely now, so I can't believe I got through this. But stay kind. Stay beautiful, stay safe. I will see you very soon. And for those of you who are going to CrimeCon, I'm probably there now or on my way there, but I cannot wait to see you guys. Thank you so much. See you very soon. Bye.
Straight down, and that river runs deep. The mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name. Better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood.